let me talk to you for a minute. Not from a place of fear, but from experience. There comes a time in life when the road you're on starts talking back to you, not with words, but with resistance, with pressure, with silence where success used to be. You're grinding, you're staying consistent, but something feels off. That's not bad luck. That's not coincidence. That's a message. Because sometimes God doesn't block your blessings. He blocks your path, so you'll stop walking in the wrong direction. Today we're talking about the signs God wants you to change your path. And if you're seeing these signs right now, don't ignore them, because ignoring them is how people stay stuck for years, doing what feels familiar instead of what feels right. Let's get into it. Sometimes the clearest message from God doesn't come loud or dramatic. It comes through resistance. It comes through silence. It comes through a door that refuses to open no matter how many times you knock, no matter how much effort you put in, no matter how pure your intentions are. You can be doing everything right on paper, waking up early, staying disciplined, sacrificing sleep, turning down distractions, staying loyal when it would be easier to quit, and still nothing moves. The opportunity never materializes. The breakthrough never comes. And that's usually the moment people start questioning themselves, thinking, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm not chosen. Maybe I missed my chance. But that's the wrong conclusion, because when a door stays closed, despite consistent effort, it's rarely rejection. It's redirection. It's life trying to move you out of a lane that no longer serves your growth. A lot of people don't understand this because we're taught that persistence always equals reward, but wisdom teaches you that persistence without alignment leads to frustration. You can grind on the wrong path for years and all it will give you is exhaustion. God isn't impressed by effort alone. He responds to purpose. And when your energy is invested in something that's no longer meant for you, the resistance increases, not to punish you, but to protect you from settling into a space that would limit who you're becoming. Look at real life for proof. Steve Jobs built Apple from nothing. He poured his vision into it. He believed in it before the world did. And still, he was removed from the very company he created. Imagine how that must have felt, not just professionally, but spiritually. Betrayed, embarrassed, confused, like the ground disappeared beneath his feet. That door didn't just close, it slammed shut publicly and painfully. And if you only judge the moment, it looks like failure, but that closed door forced him into a new season where he created Pixar. A move that reshaped animation, changed storytelling forever, and sharpened his leadership, so when he returned to Apple, he wasn't the same man. He was more focused, more refined, more dangerous in the best way. The door didn't close to stop him, it closed to upgrade him. That's how God works sometimes. He doesn't take you where you want to go, he takes you where you need to grow. And the problem is most people are too emotionally attached to the door they wanted that they miss the hallway leading to something greater. They keep knocking because they're familiar with that space, because their ego is invested there, because their identity is tied to being accepted in that room. But if you have to beg for access, if you have to keep proving your worth, if you have to shrink yourself to stay inside, that's not a blessing, that's a burden. Anything that costs you your peace is too expensive to keep paying for. Pay attention to how you feel when you're forcing something. If your spirit feels tight, if your intuition feels uneasy, if you constantly feel like you're chasing validation instead of purpose, that's a signal. Alignment feels calm, even when it's challenging. Desperation feels loud, anxious, and heavy. God doesn't bless desperation because desperation keeps you stuck seeking approval from people and systems that were never meant to validate you. Alignment puts you in rooms where your value is recognized without you having to perform for it. A closed door is often mercy in disguise, because what's behind it might look good on the surface, but long term it could cap your potential, drain your energy, and distract you from your assignment. Some opportunities are traps dressed as blessings. They offer status but steal your time. They offer money but cost your integrity. They offer familiarity but block growth, and God loves you enough to say no, even when you don't understand why. Think about how many times you look back at something you once begged for, and thank God it didn't work out at the time. You couldn't see it, but distance gave you clarity. That relationship, that job, that partnership, that environment, it felt like everything back then, and now you realize it would have kept you small. That's perspective earned through experience, and God often uses closed doors to give you that perspective before you lose years chasing the wrong outcome The hard part is trusting the process when you don't have the full picture, when all you see is effort without reward. When people around you start questioning your decisions, when self-doubt creeps in late at night, that's when faith becomes real. Not when everything is working, but when nothing is. And you still choose to believe that there's a bigger plan unfolding beneath the surface. Patience in those moments isn't passive, it's active. It's choosing not to panic, not to force, not to compromise, just to feel productive. Forcing the door open might get you inside, but it won't keep you protected once you're there, because anything you enter without alignment, you'll have to maintain with stress. You'll constantly feel like you don't belong, like you're one mistake away from being removed. Alignment, on the other hand, creates stability. You don't have to over-explain. You don't have to over-prove. You just show up and do the work because the space was designed for you. When God closes a door, he's also testing your maturity. He's asking, can you listen without seeing? Can you trust without control? Can you walk away without resentment? Because growth isn't just about reaching the next level. It's about becoming the kind of person who can sustain it. Some rooms look appealing, but they don't match the person you're evolving into. And God won't let you settle into something that contradicts your future. So if you're standing in front of a door that won't open, no matter how hard you push, stop blaming yourself, stop exhausting yourself, and start listening. Maybe the lesson isn't push harder. Maybe the lesson is pivot smarter. Maybe the real breakthrough isn't behind that door at all. Maybe it's waiting for you to let go. Turn around and move in a direction that feels unfamiliar but aligned, uncomfortable but peaceful, uncertain but right. Closed doors aren't the end of the story. They're punctuation marks telling you to pause, reflect, and reposition. Every season requires a different environment. Every level demands a different mindset, and every blessing requires space to grow. God isn't denying you. He's directing you away from limitation and toward expansion. And the moment you stop fighting the closure and start trusting the redirection is the moment your energy shifts, your clarity sharpens, and the path ahead starts revealing itself one step at a time. There comes a moment in life that nobody really prepares you for. A moment where the thing that once lit you up no longer hits the same. You remember when it used to excite you, when it used to give you purpose, when waking up felt meaningful because you were building something that felt connected to who you were back then. But now you wake up tired. Even after a full night of rest, you check off goals you once prayed for. And instead of gratitude, you feel hollow. You win on paper, money, titles, recognition, momentum, but inside there's a quiet emptiness that keeps following you. And the scariest part is you can't explain it to anyone, because from the outside, everything looks successful. That feeling isn't weakness, and it's not laziness. It's not you losing discipline or drive. It's your soul sending a message that this chapter has reached its natural ending. And most people ignore that message because they're afraid of starting over or letting go of an identity they worked hard to build. So they push through numbness, pretending it's just a phase, telling themselves they should be grateful while slowly disconnecting from themselves. Psychology backs this up. Burnout doesn't usually come from working too hard. It comes from working disconnected. When your daily actions no longer align with your values, your nervous system starts resisting, even if your mind is still committed. That's why you can love something for years and suddenly feel exhausted by it. Not because the work changed, but because you did. Growth reshapes priorities. And when your environment doesn't evolve with you, it starts draining you instead of feeding you. Think about how many people stay in careers, relationships, or lifestyles simply because they've invested time into them, not because they're fulfilled, but because walking away feels like failure. They confuse consistency with loyalty and loyalty with purpose, but staying somewhere no longer aligns with who you're becoming isn't loyalty. It's fear dressed up as responsibility, and fear will always drain you faster than hard work ever could. There are people out here making money doing things they were never assigned to do, and the cost shows up quietly: anxiety that won't leave even on days off, depression that creeps in despite success, a loss of identity because they've been playing a role for so long they forgot who they really are. They keep chasing bigger numbers, thinking that will fix the emptiness, but no amount of external reward can replace internal alignment. Money can buy comfort, but it can't buy peace. And peace is what you lose when you ignore the voice telling you it's time to shift. You ever notice how some people work crazy hours and still feel energized while others feel drained doing half as much? That's not about work ethic. That's about alignment. When you're walking in purpose, effort feels lighter even when it's heavy. When you're walking out of purpose, even small tasks feel exhausting because your spirit isn't invested anymore, and your body knows before your mind is willing to admit it. This is why rest doesn't fix the tiredness, vacations don't fix it, sleep doesn't fix it, because the exhaustion isn't physical, it's emotional and spiritual. You're tired of pretending. You're tired of forcing passion. You're tired of living a life that made sense for an older version of you, but doesn't fit anymore. And that's not a failure, that's evolution. The problem is society celebrates starting, but rarely talks about knowing when to leave something behind with wisdom. Growth demands a shift, and every shift comes with discomfort because it requires letting go of certainty. You don't quit what drains you because you hate it. You quit because you respect yourself enough to stop pouring energy into something that no longer pours back into you. And that decision is never easy because it challenges your identity. Who am I without this title, without this routine, without this version of success? But the truth is, you were someone before it. You'll be someone after it too, just more aligned, more honest, more whole. Look at real life patterns. Athletes retire not because they stop loving the game, but because their body and spirit tell them it's time. Entrepreneurs pivot not because their first idea failed, but because their vision outgrew it. Even relationships change when the growth is uneven. One person evolves while the other stays attached to comfort, and the friction becomes draining, not because either is wrong, but because they're no longer moving at the same frequency. If what once fueled you now drains you, it doesn't mean you're ungrateful. It means you're listening, and listening takes courage because it often leads you into uncertainty. God rarely calls you forward with a detailed map. He calls you with a feeling, a restlessness, a dissatisfaction that won't go away until you move. And most people try to silence that feeling with distractions instead of honoring it, but it only gets louder because it's not meant to be ignored. That feeling keep you all coursed as shit because it's meant to be ignored. Be honest with yourself about what no longer fits, even if it once meant everything to you, even if people around you don't understand, even if the old version of you is still emotionally attached. Growth doesn't ask for permission, it demands honesty. And the longer you ignore that demand, the heavier life feels until the weight becomes impossible to carry. You don't lose yourself when you outgrow something. You find yourself, you uncover layers you didn't know existed because they were buried under expectations, routines, and survival decisions that made sense at the time. Every version of you served a purpose, but none of them were meant to trap you forever. Seasons change for a reason, and holding on too long turns blessings into burden. So when you feel that heaviness, don't shame yourself. Don't compare your journey to someone who still fulfilled where you once were. And don't force passion where it no longer lives. Instead, ask yourself, who am I becoming and what environment supports that evolution? Because God doesn't drain you without intention. He drains what no longer fits to make room for what does. And the moment you accept that, the exhaustion starts to make sense, not as a sign of weakness, but as proof that you're ready for the next level, even if you don't fully see it yet. Pay close attention to this part of the journey, because this is where most people get confused. And you start thinking life is against them, when in reality, it's working in their favor. When God wants you to change direction, he doesn't always announce it with clarity. He often communicates through loss, not because he enjoys taking things away, but because some attachments are too heavy to carry into the next season. So he starts removing them one by one. People you thought would always be there drift away. Plans you were confident in suddenly collapse. Support systems you leaned on disappear. And it feels personal, like you're being punished, like you did something wrong. But most of the time you didn't do anything wrong at all. You just reached a point where what once supported you can no longer go where you're headed. Loss hurts because attachment runs deep. We don't just lose people and plans, we lose familiarity, routine, and identity. And that's what makes it uncomfortable. You're not just grieving the thing itself, you're grieving the version of yourself that existed with it. And that version served you at one point. It helped you survive, it helped you grow, it helped you get this far. But it can't go any further. God knows that before you do. So he starts creating space, even when you're resisting it. Look at the pattern in life. People who elevate almost always go through a season of isolation before expansion. Because clarity requires quiet and growth requires separation. Abraham didn't step into promise immediately. He had to leave behind familiar land, familiar people, familiar comfort, everything that made him feel safe before anything new could even begin. That separation wasn't cruelty, it was preparation. Because carrying old attachments into new territory would have distorted the vision he was being called to walk into. Sometimes God strips the excess not because it's bad, but because it's extra, and extra weight slows you down. You can't run into your next season carrying everything from the last one. That's how people miss timing. They're too busy protecting what's comfortable to embrace what's calling them forward. So life starts removing what you won't release on your own. Not to break you, but to free you from carrying burdens that no longer match your strength. People walking away can feel like rejection, but often it's protection. Some relationships are seasonal. They're meant to teach you something, support you through a phase and then end. And when you try to force permanence where God intended transition, you create unnecessary pain. Support disappearing doesn't mean you're unworthy. It means you're being taught how to stand on your own feet, how to trust the source instead of the channel. Because dependency on people instead of purpose creates fear, and fear limits growth. Plans falling apart hurt the ego the most because they represent effort, intention, and expectation. You invested time, energy, and belief into something, and watching it collapse feels like wasted years. But nothing that taught you resilience, discipline, or awareness was wasted. It was preparation in disguise. And the plan didn't fail because you weren't capable. It failed because it was outdated, and holding on to it would have kept you tied to a version of life that no longer fits who you're becoming. Ask yourself, honestly, when something leaves your life, are you missing it because it was aligned or because it was familiar? Familiarity can feel like love, purpose, and security, even when it's none of those things. And that's why letting go feels like losing control, because you're stepping into uncertainty. But uncertainty is where faith lives, and faith is where transformation happens. If you're losing things you're afraid to let go of, that fear itself is the signal. Fear shows you where you've attached your identity, where you've placed your security, and God will always challenge attachments that compete with your assignment, not because he wants to leave you empty, but because he wants your hands open. Clenched fists can't receive new blessings. They can only hold on to old ones. Think about how many times you look back at something you lost and realize it made sense later. At the time, it felt like devastation, but with perspective, you saw the freedom that came with it, the space it created, the strength it forced you to build on your own, the clarity it unlocked. Loss often reveals your real foundation, what you lean on when everything else is removed. And that foundation is what God wants rooted in him, not in people, not in plans, not in comfort. This is where trust becomes real, not when life is adding, but when it's subtracting. Because subtraction feels like regression, even when it's actually refinement. God refines by removing distractions, dependencies, and excess. So your focus sharpens, your vision clears, and your strength concentrates. What remains after loss is always more powerful than what you started with, because it's been tested by absence. Holding on too tightly is often the reason things slip away. The harder you grip, the more pressure you create, and pressure breaks what wasn't meant to be forced. Letting go isn't giving up. It's aligning with the truth that not everything that enters your life is meant to stay, and not everything that leaves is meant to be chased. God will never take something from you without replacing it with something better, but better doesn't always look familiar at first. It often looks like space, silence, and uncertainty, and most people panic in that space instead of recognizing it as preparation. Empty space is where new foundations are built. Silence is where direction becomes clear, and uncertainty is where courage is developed. When attachments fall away and you feel exposed, remind yourself that exposure isn't weakness, it's readiness. Nothing is blocking your view anymore. Nothing is weighing you down anymore. Nothing is limiting your movement anymore. What feels like loss is actually release, and release is necessary for elevation. You don't lose what's meant for you, you outgrow it, and growth always demands room to expand. If you really sit with your life long enough, you start to notice patterns, not just moments, not just situations, but patterns. They keep looping no matter how much you try to escape them. You change the job thinking the environment was the problem, and somehow you end up with the same type of pressure, the same type of disrespect, the same kind of stress. You change the relationship thinking this time will be different, and you still feel the same pain, the same imbalance, the same emotional weight. You move to a new city chasing a fresh start, and after the excitement fades, the same dissatisfaction shows up again. And that's usually when frustration turns into confusion, because you did everything people say you're supposed to do. You switched the setting, you took action, you tried something new, and yet nothing truly changed. That's not bad luck, and it's not the world being unfair. That's an unlearned lesson making itself known again. Life is the most consistent teacher you'll ever have, and it doesn't fail students. It repeats the test until the lesson sinks in. You can avoid it for a while, distract yourself with new scenery, new faces, new routines, but eventually the same situation will appear in a different form, because the lesson isn't tied to the place, it's tied to you. Different job, same toxic boss, different relationship, same emotional wound, different opportunity, same self-doubt. That's not coincidence, that's alignment showing you where growth is required. The environment didn't create the pattern, it revealed it. And until the internal shift happens, the external cycle continues, because life mirrors what you tolerate, what you believe, and how you move through the world. God speaks through patterns long before he speaks through clarity. Repetition is a form of communication. When the same lesson keeps showing up, it's not meant to frustrate you, it's meant to wake you up. Because the longer you avoid learning it, the louder it becomes. At first, it's subtle discomfort, then it's obvious tension, and eventually it turns into pain because pain demands attention in ways comfort never will. A lot of people stay stuck blaming the setting instead of examining the direction. They keep asking, why does this always happen to me? Without asking, what is this trying to teach me? Because that question requires accountability, and accountability is uncomfortable. It means accepting that some patterns exist because of choices, boundaries, beliefs, or behaviors that haven't evolved yet. And that's hard to face, but it's also the doorway to freedom. Think about it. People who keep attracting the same kind of disrespect usually haven't learned how to enforce boundaries. People who keep feeling undervalued often haven't learned how to value themselves without external approval. People who keep ending up in draining situations often haven't learned how to walk away early instead of hoping things will change. Awareness doesn't mean self-blame, it means self-ownership, and ownership is power. Once you grow, the test changes, not because life suddenly gets easy, but because your response does. You stop reacting emotionally and start responding intentionally. You stop repeating old habits and start making conscious choices. You stop chasing what feels familiar and start choosing what feels aligned. And that shift changes everything, because life doesn't just respond to what happens to you, it responds to how you move when it happens. The same lesson showing up is actually a sign of progress, because it means you're being given another chance to get it right. Most people don't realize that repetition is mercy, not punishment. God could let you stay comfortable and unaware, but instead he allows the pattern to resurface so you can finally see it clearly and decide to move differently this time. Look at how growth works in real life. Athletes review game footage not to relive mistakes, but to correct patterns. Businesses analyze failures not to feel regret, but to adjust strategy. Personal growth works the same way. Until you understand your patterns, you'll keep living inside them, but once you see them, you gain the power to change direction. The moment you respond differently to a familiar situation, something breaks the cycle. You say no where you used to say yes. You walk away where you used to stay silent. You choose yourself where you used to seek approval, and life immediately feels different. Not because the world changed, but because you did. And that's when the test evolves into a new level. People often pray for change, but resist growth, not realizing that growth is the change they're asking for. You can't pray your way out of a lesson you're supposed to learn. You have to live your way through it with awareness, humility, and courage. And that process is rarely comfortable, but it's always worth it, because every lesson mastered removes a layer of struggle from your life. Pay attention to what keeps repeating, not to judge yourself, but to understand yourself. Patterns reveal where healing is needed, where boundaries are weak, where belief systems are outdated, and where fear still has influence. Once you identify the lesson, you stop fighting the situation and start fixing the source. And that's when momentum shifts. When you finally move differently, life responds differently. Doors open, conversations change, opportunities align, and peace replaces confusion, not because you escaped the lesson, but because you graduated from it. Growth doesn't come from avoiding tests, it comes from passing them, and once you do, the cycle breaks and a new chapter begins, not by accident, but by intention. There's a certain feeling you can't run from, no matter how busy you stay, no matter how loud life gets. It shows up in quiet moments, late at night when the world slows down, early in the morning before distractions take over. It's that pull, that whisper, that idea you keep pushing aside, telling yourself it's not the right time or you're not ready yet. But deep down, you already know what you're supposed to do. And that knowing is what makes it uncomfortable, because the fear isn't about failure, it's about loss. Loss of stability, loss of identity, loss of what you've built so far. This is the deepest signs, because it doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within. Nobody else can see it, nobody else can validate it, and that's why it feels heavy. You can't explain it without sounding crazy. You can't justify it with logic, and you can't silence it with success, because it isn't asking for comfort, it's asking for movement. Faith was never about staying safe. It was about obedience, stepping forward before everything makes sense, trusting the direction, even when the destination isn't clear. Most people don't fail because they lack talent, intelligence, or opportunity. They fail because they delay the calling until it fades. They wait for certainty, permission, or perfect timing, and by the time they are ready, the window has shifted. History is filled with people who had the ability to do something meaningful but waited too long and lived with regret, because regret is quieter than fear but heavier in the long run. At the same time, history is also filled with people who moved while afraid, who stepped forward with shaking hands and uncertain plans, and changed their lives not because they were fearless, but because they were willing. Courage isn't confidence, it's action in the presence of fear. Confidence often comes after you move, not before. You don't become brave and then take the step. You take the step and bravery grows in you. Think about how many times you felt called to speak up, start something, leave something, or become something, and talked yourself out of it because it threatened your comfort zone. Comfort feels good, but it slowly numbs ambition and dulls purpose. Staying where you are might feel safe, but safety without growth turns into stagnation, and stagnation slowly drains the spirit. God doesn't reveal the whole staircase, because if he did, most people would never start. They'd overthink every step, every obstacle, every unknown. Instead, he asks for the first step, because movement creates clarity. Clarity doesn't come from thinking, it comes from doing. You don't need to know how it will work. You need to know why you're moving and trust that the path will unfold as you walk it. That calling you feel isn't random, it's not imagination, and it's not ego. It's an invitation to align your life with who you're meant to become. And the fear attached to it doesn't mean it's wrong. It means it matters. Fear shows up where purpose lives because purpose requires change. And change threatens the familiar, the known, and the control parts of your life. People often mistake fear as a sign to stop, when in reality it's often a sign to prepare. Fear asks questions that force you to grow. It challenges you to build strength, develop discipline, and deepen faith. If you wait for fear to disappear before moving, you'll wait forever, because fear doesn't vanish, it transforms when you face it. Look at every major turning point in your life. The moments that shaped you weren't comfortable, they were uncertain. You didn't have guarantees, you had conviction. You didn't have a clear roadmap, you had a sense of direction. And that was enough to start, and starting changed you more than staying ever could. Ignoring the calling doesn't make it go away, it just makes it heavier. The longer you ignore it, the more restless you feel, the more disconnected you become from yourself, because you're living against your own truth, and that inner conflict is exhausting. It shows up as frustration, anxiety, or dissatisfaction, not because life is bad, but because you're not living in alignment with what you know. You don't need approval to move forward. You don't need everyone to understand. You don't need a perfect plan. You need willingness. Willingness to take the first step, knowing you'll learn as you go. Faith grows through movement, not meditation alone. Action strengthens belief in ways comfort never can. There will never be a moment where everything lines up perfectly before you move. There will always be risk, uncertainty, and sacrifice, but there will also be growth, freedom, and clarity on the other side. Every time you choose obedience over comfort, you build trust, not just in God, but in yourself. You prove to yourself that you can move through fear and still stand strong. That quiet voice will keep calling because it's tied to your purpose, and purpose doesn't expire, but time does. And the longer you wait, the more energy it takes to move, not because the calling weakens, but because fear grows roots in indecision. Moving afraid isn't reckless, it's faithful. It's acknowledging the fear and choosing not to let it lead. The first step